counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Dewbs and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. I am Michelle Dewberry and this is Dewbs & Co. A packed show coming up for you tonight. The government have been in court yet again and you know why. It is, of course, the Rwanda plan. They lost though. It's not going to happen. They're not going to be able to, as it stands, send people over to Rwanda. What happens next then, guys? Is it a case of ignore the courts and push on anyway? Or the flip side of it is the government should drop it all together and come up with something new? What says you? And do you know what a CBDC is? A digital pound, to give it another name. Do you think that we need a central bank digital currency in this country? I, for one, find this a very dangerous path to tread. What do you say to it? And Labour have backtracked on their plans for rent controls. Do you think we should cap rents? If so, who gets to decide what is appropriate and what happens if landlords miss out? What happens if they take the properties off the market? And in today's World Gone Mad news, schoolgirls getting assaulted, sexually assaulted in gender-neutral toilets in their own schools. Why are they even a thing? We're going to have it all to come and more. But before we get into it, let's bring ourselves up to speed with tonight's latest headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Michelle, thank you. Well, good evening to you. The top story tonight is that the Home Secretary says she remains fully committed to the Rwanda policy despite the legal setback. Suella Braverman also suggested the current system was rigged against the British people. And earlier, the Prime Minister said he fundamentally disagreed with the Court of Appeal after they deemed the policy unlawful. 2 of the 3 judges found the East African country was unsafe. The Rwandan government, for its part, has pushed back on that, saying it is one of the safest countries in the world. The Home Secretary has said the government will seek permission to appeal now to the Supreme Court.
Fair, Mr. Speaker, on people and our partners in the developing world, that we in the West continue to maintain an asylum seeker system so open to abuse that it incentivises mass flows of economic migration into Europe, lining the pockets of people smugglers and turning our seas into graveyards, all in the name of a phony humanitarianism.
Now, Thames Water has appointed a new chair amid pressures the company faces concerns about its finances. Adrian Montague, previously chair of Anglian Water, will take over on July 10th. Thames Water now says it's working with shareholders to secure extra funding as ministers draw up contingency plans to potentially renationalise it in the event of a collapse. The UK's biggest water supplier is battling to service its £14 billion worth of debt following interest rate rises. Now, in France, a police officer has been placed under formal investigation for voluntary manslaughter after a teenage pizza delivery driver was shot dead by traffic police. The mother of the 17-year-old, Nahal M, is leading a march in Nanterre, that's a western suburb of Paris, in tribute to her son, demanding justice. At least 180 people have been arrested so far after 2 nights of unrest that followed Nahal's death. And earlier, it was announced 40,000 police officers would be deployed across the country to deal with the unrest. The French town of Clamart, near Paris, has imposed a curfew from 9 until 6 in the morning until Monday. Now here, spying on left-wing groups by a secret Metropolitan Police squad wasn't justified and the unit should have been disbanded. That comes after a public inquiry into undercover policing looked at the activities of the SDS, or the Special Demonstration Squad, between 1968 and 1982. A spokesperson for campaigners says the findings are devastating for the police. The police has apologised for what happened over 40 years ago, saying that undercover policing has since undergone radical reform. Now, Boris Johnson's allies have been criticised by the Privileges Committee for what it describes as the undermining of the House of Commons procedures. They include Nadine Dorries, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg and Priti Patel. The Privileges Committee report 2 weeks ago found the former Prime Minister had repeatedly misled Parliament over COVID-19 breaches during lockdown. The inquiry says MPs should consider whether their actions could be in contempt of Parliament and what further action should be taken. Nicola Sturgeon has been telling the COVID-19 inquiry today that Scotland had no plan for a non-flu pandemic and that learning from the episode was of critical importance. The former First Minister was questioned this morning on how prepared Scotland was as a nation and how well she, as a politician, handled the pandemic. She also told the inquiry her government did its best, but admitted it didn't get everything right. She was asked about the pandemic plan viability in Scotland.
There's no set plan, which, as I say, is not the same as saying there was no thinking into how we dealt with a pandemic that had features and characteristics of flu in terms of transmissibility, but also the severity and what we came to understand in terms of the asymptomatic transmission of COVID-19. So I would readily accept that there was a gap in terms of the pandemic we ultimately were dealing with.
Now, the 3 Just Stop Oil protesters who invaded the pitch at Lord's Cricket Ground in London yesterday have all been charged with aggravated trespass. Judith Murray, Daniel Knorr, Jacob Bourne disrupted the second Ashes test yesterday. They're due to appear at Westminster Magistrates Court next month. One of the world's most used artificial sweeteners could be declared a potential carcinogen as soon as next month. New research from the World Health Organization has found aspartame, which is used in diet sodas and chewing gum, could cause cancer. The study by the International Agency for Research on Cancer revealed the findings, and last month the WHO published guidelines advising consumers not to use artificial sweeteners to lose weight, causing a furore in the food industry. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Thanks for that, Polly. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm with you until 7 o'clock tonight alongside me, former Brexit Party MEP and the CEO of First Property Group, Ben Habib, and journalist and political commentator Michael Walker. You also as well do a podcast, don't you, on property?
I do, yes.
That is going to be very handy, everyone, because among other things tonight, I do want to talk about the fact that Labour have backtracked on yet another one of their pledges, which are about rent controls, whether or not we should have those in the first place or not. Also, CBDC, do you know what that is? It's not a song, it's not a children's programme or anything like that. It's a central bank digital currency. Many people don't know what they are, but they have the potential to change life as we know it. That might be coming our way as well in this country. So I want to get into that as well tonight and lots more. And you know the drill, don't you? You can get in touch with me, email gbviews@gbnews.com, or you can tweet me at gbnews. But of course, top story of the day, the Court of Appeal judges have deemed that the Rwanda plan is unlawful. It was voted 2 against 1, basically. So one person said it could go ahead, 2 of the other judges deemed not. This has divided opinion, the response to this, Ben, because a few people are now saying it's time for the government just to accept it's not going to work, sack it off and progress in a different direction. The flip side of that will be people like me that say, pack it in with this legal system, just push ahead regardless and deal with the consequences afterwards. What do you make to it all?
Well, I've been critical of the Rwanda plan from the minute it was revealed. And the reason I've been critical of it is because it was fraught, I thought it would be fraught with legal problems, not just domestically, but also with the European Court of Human Rights. And we saw that when they tried to take their first plane load of refugees, deportees to Kigali. You know, all, I think, 199 of them, bar 1, were removed by British courts, and then the last one was removed by a European Court of Human Rights ruling. But it's also extremely expensive. We discovered that the other day, £170,000 cost per head, you know, and if this is meant to act as a deterrent to more people crossing from France to the United Kingdom, what it had to be was an efficient, slick deportation mechanism that got lots of people off British soil efficiently, quickly to Rwanda. It was never going to achieve that, even if it got over all the legal hurdles. And the problem with our government's policy on border control is that it tries to see it through a policy on deportation. Deportation is actually what you do when border control has failed. So the government's actually given up entirely. We have an unenforced eastern border between ourselves and France. And I don't know if I've got 30 seconds more. Have I got 30 seconds more?
Well, you can in a sec. Let me bring Michael in, then we'll come back. Michael, what do you make to it?
Well, I mean, I think what you're suggesting is to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, because that's what it would mean to sort of push forward with this, regardless of what any judge says.
No, in the first instance. So I would come on to that perhaps as a secondary thought, but my primary thought would be let's just get a plane load out there, deal with the consequences later, whatever consequences there may be.
Well, I suppose what the judges have said in this instance is that that would be a breach of the European Convention on Human Rights.
And what?
Well, and what? It's a good question, right? So the European Convention on Human Rights was agreed in the 1950s. It was pushed by political leaders after the Second World War because they didn't want to see a repeat of the kind of human rights abuses we saw in Europe then. Winston Churchill was one of the main pushers. This was never a Remainer
But the world's
plot.
changed massively since then.
The world has changed massively since then, but it has still provided an underpinning for protecting our rights, the right for association, the right for freedom of speech. And I suppose I would say if we're going to move away from what has been a core plank of international law, there should be a very, very good reason. And if we look at the numbers of people who are arriving in Britain claiming asylum, it's not that many, right? So the UK, there were 75,000 people who claimed asylum here last year. In France, it was 130,000 last year. In Germany, it was 200,000 last year.
But I don't care about France and Germany because I don't live there. I care about the UK.
OK, you care about the UK. But what I'm saying is, well, I mean, to be honest, I don't necessarily think that is a particularly helpful way of looking at the world. I think we do need to have some sort of international responsibility to our partners. But I think it would be a shame if the UK goes it alone, like Greece did in the 1960s when they had a military coup, and like Russia did when they invaded Ukraine. These are the only two countries who've left the convention.
That's a little bit extreme. Referencing it, oh, you've got a military coup there, you've got this war there.
But this isn't about asylum seekers. This is about people entering the United Kingdom illegally. It's not about trying to reduce the number of people seeking asylum in the UK by sending them to Rwanda. This is by making it known that if you seek to enter the United Kingdom illegally and you do so, you will not be given asylum. You will be sent to Rwanda. And that's what the new illegal migration bill is all about. And I think this latest ruling, by the way, I don't think it has anything to do with the European Convention of Human Rights. This is domestic British law that has ruled that Rwanda is not a suitable country to which to send people. And
it's about the safety of how they would treat the asylum seekers. So it's not necessarily, is Rwanda a safe place for you to go on your holiday to, as I'm interpreting what they're saying. It's more about
whether their rights can be assured.
Yeah, how would they treat the people that are asylum seekers?
Yeah.
Would they let those people down and send them back to where they could be persecuted and all the rest of it?
But my point is much more fundamental than the approach taken by the government, which is that if someone's seeking to enter your country illegally, you have to stop them at the point of entry. And we have all the legal right to do that. It's settled international law that people must not be allowed. And
as if by magic.
So I asked your producer to kindly put this up, and he consented, which was very good of him. This is Article 33 of the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea. This is an established international law that all members of the UN have bought into. And it says, in a zone contiguous to its territorial sea, described as a contiguous zone, so that's a zone of water just outside your territorial water, the coastal state, in this case the United Kingdom, may exercise the control necessary to prevent infringement of its immigration laws and regulations. We have the right to stop the boats as they seek to enter our territorial water and require them to go back to France. And
so how would we do that then?
Well, we have to have a trained force with appropriate equipment, appropriate boats, to intercept these boats and instead of providing a taxi service, stop them and require them to go back to France. It's simple as that.
Let's role play
Refuse
this.
entry.
So what does this mean then? So there's this dinghy full of people on the channel. The border force boat rocks up, says to them with a megaphone, whatever, right, you're not going back to England. They're going to tip themselves out of these dinghies to create an international, to create a water rescue. What then?
Well, you
rescue them.
You don't rescue them. You push out another dinghy to them and you say, climb into that dinghy and go back to France. That's the last dinghy you get. You can have any number of solutions.
But they won't do that.
You can have any number of solutions, Michelle. You could have a boat registered outside. The key here is not to allow them onto a British boat, because the minute they're on a British boat, they get protected by exactly the kinds of human rights laws and everything else that we are now struggling with in our courts. What they have to know is that they will not be allowed to get that protection.
Do you think that's fair?
Well, so just to go back to a previous point, I mean, it was mentioned in the court ruling that what this would breach is Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Why I brought up Greece and Russia is they're the only two countries who've left it so far. So while they might seem like extreme examples, they would be the only other two people in the group of people who'd left
the European
Convention.
But why does that matter?
Why does it matter? Well, I think it makes our country look pretty poor if we have...
To who?
To who? Well, to the global community, and I suppose
why
to myself,
why do we care what the global community think?
Well, because I do think that... I mean, let's go back to when this convention was written up and why it was written up, was because we had seen in Europe, I mean, the Holocaust for a start, we'd seen millions of people exterminated, we'd seen such awful breaches of human rights that we decided that probably as a global community, we do need to come together and decide a few ground rules, right? To say, we can't just say, I'm all right, Jack, what's happening
well,
on my island
actually, the ECHR was in many ways conceived to control Germany. For, you know, what Germany did during World War II.
Well, I mean, as much as the EU was, right? So much as the EU was to say, let's integrate France and Germany so they can never go to war again. But what I think we'd be on dangerous territory if we say it doesn't matter what any other country thinks about us. It doesn't matter about human rights. I'm all right, Jack, we just do our own thing. That's how you end up getting lumped in groups with Vladimir Putin in Russia and a military dictatorship in Greece in the 1960s.
For me, the primary concern is not our international reputation. The primary concern to me is sovereignty in this country, so actually that this country have the final say in what we do and don't have and what we do and don't want and all the rest of it. So for me, that's a core principle. Sovereignty is here in this country. Secondly, to Ben's point, this is not about saying, you know, if you are genuinely in risk of being persecuted or tortured or whatever, then we're not going to help you, because I don't think like that at all. I think, for example, the people in Afghanistan that we're trying to help, I think we should have helped more of them, actually, those people that helped us in Afghanistan. I think it's shameful that we haven't helped more of those people. So genuine asylum seekers that are in danger, of course we would help. But this isn't about that. This is about an abusive system and us being powerless to stop it.
Well, I mean, it is about saying that, I'm afraid to say. So the reason that courts have made this decision today is because they've said, well, for one, it's very important to recognise that if you are an asylum seeker from most countries, there is no way to get to Britain other than irregularly. So
no, that's not
there
right.
aren't legal routes.
There are legal routes.
There are only legal routes from Ukraine and then Afghanistan, although we haven't let anyone through that for
other
6 to 12 months. But if you're from Iran, if you're from Iraq, where lots of these people are from, you can't. And
but Michael, they're coming from France. They're not coming from any of these war-torn countries. They're safe.
I have two problems with this argument. One, which is I think we should probably all accept that there is a right for refugees to seek asylum, and we as countries in the international community should take our fair share.
No.
Now, France is already taking...
I don't understand what does a fair share mean?
What a fair share means, I think, that you're taking migrants somewhere in proportion.
But why should we take any migrants?
Well, why should we take it? Because if we don't take any, why should anyone else take any?
Why should they? Why should anyone take an economic migrant?
Well, these aren't... So
they are. The minute they're in France coming to the UK, they're economic migrants.
That's not how these laws work, right? So you can be an asylum seeker and you can claim asylum...
But that's true, though, they're safe in France.
Well, they're not subject to persecution as they would be in Iraq or Iran or wherever they came from. But this is not how... That doesn't make someone an economic migrant.
But
so we have international law for this.
It's purely economic motivation.
It doesn't make...
And they're breaking the law to get here.
You have a right as an asylum seeker to seek asylum wherever you want. It's not illegal to do that. That's established in international law.
It is illegal to cross the channel without papers.
It's important that would be the case, because otherwise what we'd be saying is the millions of people who left Syria during the Syrian civil war, we'd say, you should all go stay in Greece. And if you say you should all go stay in Greece, then that's going to be a bit of a problem for Greece, isn't it? So I think we have a problem with... We say we're lucky enough to be an island. We're not directly bordering any war-torn country. Therefore, the people who should take all of these asylum seekers are the countries who are neighbouring those war-torn countries. Now, that is us not taking our responsibility. And if I was in one of those countries that was next to one of those war-torn countries, I would be saying, why aren't you taking your fair share? We can't just say, we're lucky enough to be an island, so we're not going to take anyone.
A fair share is such an emotive term without having any definition.
OK, well,
what is a fair share?
So you could say a fair share. You could say that all the people who want to come to Europe, we will divide them up according to per capita who lives in a country. So you say every country in Europe has a responsibility to take a number of refugees proportionate to their population.
Well, do you share that view at home? I think it's a bit bonkers, quite frankly, but I'll open it up to you guys. All views welcome. What are you shouting at your screens as we have this conversation? I've got to say, so much coming up tonight. Central bank digital currency. Do you even know what that is? That is something that might be coming our way soon. And if you ask me, it would be a disaster. Don't go anywhere.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you until 7 o'clock. Quite an interesting debate just then in terms of what on earth do we do next when it comes to Rwanda. Get your thoughts coming in and I'll share some before the end of the programme. Alongside me, the former Brexit Party MEP, CEO of First Property Group as well, Ben Habib, and the journalist, political commentator Michael Walker. Lots coming your way, but a very interesting consultation closes tomorrow. Many of you might not even know that it is a thing. Do you know what a central bank digital currency is, so-called the digital pound? I imagine that many of you might say, no, you don't know what it is. Here to help us understand what it is and what it means is the economist Vicky Price. Good evening to you. Vicky, cut straight to the chase. Help my viewers understand what is a central bank digital currency.
It's a currency that is issued by the central bank, the Bank of England in this case. It's being considered in lots of other countries as well. And you'll have a certain amount that you can use. Each person can have something somewhere between £10,000 and £20,000 in that currency, which basically sort of allows you to use this money to pay for all sorts of things that you may need without going through the banking system, basically, which makes it cheaper, supposedly, and quicker for those transactions to take place. But it is meant to be in parallel with cash. In other words, with sterling, which will be issued by the central banks. It's not eliminating cash altogether, but it is a serious problem in terms of what does it mean for the banking system as a whole if you don't use the banking system when you're doing those transactions, possibly, and what does it also mean in terms of do you have anonymity when you're doing these transactions, or will eventually this central bank currency take over all other means of transactions that you make, and therefore you become basically seen as with every transaction you make by the state making those transactions, so anonymity sort of disappears from the system.
Yeah, I've got to say, Vicky, I am not a fan of CBDCs at all. For the reasons that you describe, there's a massive loss of privacy, if you ask me. You're ceding control, essentially, to an organisation, the Bank of England, who, quite frankly, Vicky, I would say, have behaved appallingly and, I would say probably quite negligently. Recently, they've failed in their single job to maintain inflation, so why would we want to cede even more control to them?
Well, the truth is, of course, that sterling is backed by the Bank of England. It's a legal tender. You can use it wherever you want and pay with it. And this central bank currency will also be doing the same thing. What the Bank of England and other central banks have been worried about is the growth of non-bank financial intermediaries that have been developed very significantly now and which they cannot control. And the second is the growth of cryptocurrencies, which are used not so much for payment, but mainly in order to perhaps sort of invest in a currency and hope that the price will go up. But truth is that it has also been used for criminal transactions and hiding, where the money is going to and also where it's coming from and what exactly it is hiding in terms of what has happened behind that type of transaction. So I think it is a reaction to this and also a reaction to the fact that cash is being used a lot less. Now, there has to be a strong reason for justifying moving to a central bank digital currency from where we are now. And I think the consultation that's going on at present is aimed to take all those issues into account before moving into the next phase. And we're still a long way from having decided across all the banks, the central banks of the world and the International Monetary Fund and the Bank for International Settlements, that this is the way forward. But it could well be, and I think it is true that cash transactions have declined to something like possibly 15% of everything that happens now. They were much, much higher just a few decades ago. But is that the reason for moving to central bank digital currency?
Because
before
I let you go, you see, I would raise issue with this. Economists and etc. saying, yes, cash is in decline. I would argue that's not because, in often cases, personal choice. It's because we're being forced in that direction. To me, this all feels like some kind of agenda playing out to actually remove cash as much as possible from the system. So many of my viewers, for example, will say that they want to be able to go and pay with cash, but they're not able to. Signs up everywhere now saying cashless shop, cashless restaurant, cards only. So yes, we're reducing the volume of cash we use, but that's because we're being forced into that.
I have to say that I agree with you entirely in that. You go to places to try and pay by cash and they say only cards. And yet cash is, as I said at the beginning, a legal tender. I mean, your pound that you're holding, you have to accept it. And I'm very surprised. They started with COVID. Quite a lot of things that started with COVID, lots of restrictions seem to have remained since, which make very little sense. And the truth also is, yes, we use contactless payments. We do a lot of digital currency transactions anyway right now. The question is, can you reduce some of that cost to retailers and us? Possibly, maybe the central bank digital currency will do that. But in reality, lots of people now, particularly with the cost of living crisis, are looking at cash a lot more because doing contactless doesn't necessarily tell you how much you've got left immediately in your balance. And what cash has now allows you to do is perhaps budget a little bit better. And I mentioned this 15% figure for 2021, but actually we've seen a bit of an increase in cash being used for precisely those reasons. And the fact that loads of firms still and retail outlets still don't accept it is a real problem.
Indeed. You say it doesn't make much sense, by the way. It makes perfect sense to me. I do think there is an agenda at play. People have got a little bit happy and a little bit too comfortable with the amount of power and control that they had during COVID and are looking to extend it. That's my view. Vicky Price, I thank you for yours too. One of the things, viewers, I just want to play this to you because we're talking about the Bank of England central bank digital currency, right? But listen to this from the IMF. This is where alarm bells ring in my mind. Listen.
If we are to be successful, CBDCs could not be fragmented national propositions. To have transactions more efficient and fairer, we need systems that connect countries. In other words, we need interoperability. And for this reason, at the IMF, we are working hard on the concept of a global CBDC platform to trade and to manage risks.
Yeah, so that's the head of the IMF there. Listen to this one as well, my last little clip for you. This is the Bank for International Settlements. Listen.
Cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that.
These are huge red flags to me, Ben Habib, because too many people in unelected bodies, in lots of cases, have got a little bit too happy and comfortable with having power. And when I hear all about this, so it's one thing the Bank of England doing this, but that's not enough. The IMF saying it needs to all be globalised. Later on at 7 o'clock, you're going to hear from Nigel Farage. He's going to tell the story about people trying to kick him out of the UK banking system. When all of this is controlled and all digital and it's all programmable, so people will be able to dictate what you can spend, where you can spend it. There's a big piece about digital ID, all kind of embedded within this. This makes me deeply uncomfortable and I reject it. Where are you on it?
Well, I'm deeply uncomfortable with it as well. And just to, to emphasise a couple of things that Vicky said, this is the antithesis of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And cryptocurrency is a supreme mechanism by which to manage your own transactions outside any form of scrutiny. It's decentralised. And it's completely decentralised. It's not even intermediated. The use of cash, deposits and so on, is intermediated at the moment through banks. You can hold physical cash, and I'm going to come back to that, because physical cash is a use of cash that we can actually, liberates us. But this central bank digital currency is the ultimate in a regulated currency. Every single currency unit will be registered in your name at the Bank of England, and they will know precisely what you did with it, and they can do with that unit of currency whatever they wish. So, for example, when I was an MEP, I was part of the Economics Committee, and we interviewed Christine Lagarde before she took over as head of the ECB, and she gave a pretty drab interview until we started talking about central bank digital currencies, and her eyes lit up.
It does not surprise me. It doesn't surprise me, Ben.
And as a Brexiteer, you can imagine the kind of reaction that, engendered in me. But the reason her eyes lit up was because she knew that would allow the ECB to take interest rates into negative territory. With cash, you can at least take it out of the bank and put it under your mattress if you don't like what they're doing. With the CBDC, you lose complete control of your wealth.
I suppose it's worth mentioning and sort of recognising that already we use digital currencies. They're just controlled by the international banking sector and private banks. So, I mean, who do I trust more, the Bank of England or Barclays?
No, this is different.
I'm fairly agnostic.
This is different.
So what we have is digitalised use of a cash system.
Yeah.
This is a CBDC will be a registered unit of currency in the central bank. It'll have your name on it. It's not like you going and just using your credit card as a mechanism to expedite cash moving through the system. This is much more controlling.
Yeah, and it's also very confusing. So when you look at this consultation, which closes tomorrow on the Bank of England, I mean, good luck even understanding the questions that they are asking you. I would say it's deliberately confusing. But also when I hear about, we're talking about trialling things like universal basic income, it wouldn't surprise me if you fast forward a few years, you've got the situation where you've got this global digital currency controlled by, I don't even know, the World Economic Forum, the IMF. You can pick your body. And then we're all allowed, all of us plebs, get scattered a few coins that they decide where we can spend it, but only if we're good enough, because, of course, many of us will be familiar with what happens in China when it comes to the social credit system there. Anyway, what are your thoughts on it all? You might even be sitting there going, what on earth is Michelle talking about now? Are you? Or are you on the other side of the fence that actually thinks that this is a very big red flag? Now, let's talk rent next. Do you think that there should be caps, rent controls? It used to be a Labour policy for quite a while, but it's been rowed back from. Is that the right decision or not?
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions, and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio, and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you until 7 o'clock tonight. Former Brexit Party MEP and CEO of First Property Group Ben Habib is alongside me, as is a journalist, political commentator Mike Walker. Lots of you getting in touch about those 2 topics, the migration situation, what to do now that Rwanda has basically failed in the courts. I would say just push ahead. Anyway, don't worry about it. Deal with the consequences later. But I'm not in charge of this country, so I was asking you, what do you think that people should do? We need to fast track to the Supreme Court, says Henry. That will be the next step, of course, and I imagine that the government will take that step. Nick says we just have to accept that we've lost control of our country. It's a very sad day for Great Britain, says Nick. Lots of people agreeing with you, Ben, in terms of, stopping it happening in the first place rather than trying to deal with it afterwards. Peter says close the borders under an emergency law and try and deport everyone that has arrived legally. Anyway, keep your thoughts coming in GB Views at gbnews.com. Let's talk renting, shall we? Do you rent? Are you a landlord? Average rent in the UK has risen now to £1,213. I mean, these rents do seem to be getting out of control now. Often people have their rent increased for no real reason, I would argue, other than landlord greed sometimes. Labour Party for a while have been saying that they would put rent caps in. That seems to be rowed back on now, Michael. Thoughts?
Yeah, well, I don't think the Labour Party frontbench ever actually committed to rent control. So sort of Sadiq Khan has been calling for it, Andy Burnham has been calling for it, and now the Labour frontbench or the Labour shadow cabinet have said we're not going to be doing that. On one level, I do agree with the Labour Party sort of leadership on this, which is that the real problem to the housing crisis is going to be on the supply side. And I think the real mistake that we made in this country was we stopped building council homes. So not only in the 1980s did Margaret Thatcher start selling off council homes, but she banned councils from reinvesting that money in new council homes. And I think if we had been building council homes at the rate we did in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, 90s and 2010s, we wouldn't have the problem we are in at the moment. At the same time, I think the Labour Party have a problem because obviously if you're just looking at the supply side, it's going to take quite a while to build all those houses that would naturally bring down rents. And we do have a short-term crisis. So I've come on the show before and complained that last summer I got a rent increase of 15%. Just last week I got another rent increase of 12.5%. So over 2 years, that's a 30% rent increase. Now, obviously, the house hasn't changed. The house didn't get 30% bigger. All I am doing is giving a bigger chunk of my income to a landlord who hasn't improved the service. Now, I think you do have a massive problem in this
So
country.
why don't you go live somewhere else?
Well, why don't I go live somewhere else? Well, for one, I quite like living in the community where I do. But two, if I live somewhere else, that's also going to be rather expensive, right? So it's not that I live in a particularly expensive flat. It's an ex-council flat in East London. It's not a mansion, right? So I could move out of London, but my job's in London. My friends are in London. It's not something I particularly want to do. I also think that we do, as a society, if we've got more and more people living in the private rental sector, which we do, we need to start offering people a way by which they can have a decent quality of life in that sector. And a decent quality of life requires some ability to plan into the future. Now, it's very difficult for me, or many other people. I mean, I'm obviously not the worst affected here. If you're a parent with children, this is a much more severe problem for you. You might have to move your kid out of a school because your rent goes up. So if we are going to have a situation where there aren't enough council homes for people, where people can't get on the property ladder, what we have to do is make private renting tolerable. And the only way to do that is to give stability and security to private renters, which will require some degree of at least rent stabilisation.
Yeah, Ben, I've got to say, right, I do feel that housing in this country is broken. I do believe that the private rental sector has a place and has a part to play, but I also do worry that there are some landlords out there not all landlords. There are some good landlords. I'm not demonising landlords, that is for sure. But there are certainly some, they don't invest in their properties. Their properties are ramshackled at best. And they do just inflate their rents for no real reason other than they can. And yes, people will say, but hang on, Michelle, mortgages have gone up. Yes, they have if you've reached the end of your products. But we're seeing loads of examples of landlords putting rent up just because they can, not because their product's changed.
Well, I mean, the best way to keep rents as low as possible is, as Mike suggested, which is to increase the supply of property into the market, particularly in this case into the private rented sector. And for that, there should be funding made available to developers, not to buyers, which has been Tory policy for the last 13 years, to make funding available to buyers rather than to developers. There should be a relaxation of planning restraints and conditions. It's been an ever more increasingly bureaucratic and expensive process to get planning permission. That should be reined right back so that you can expedite the creation of these new homes. And there's also been, I'm afraid, completely unjoined up thinking from government. So they've wanted an efficient PRS system, private rented sector, but they've taxed landlords. If you own a second home, you pay an extra 3% stamp duty. They removed the ability to relieve costs against income. So you used to be
able to offset your interest.
Your interest and the cost of management of the property. So they've actually, government steps have been against renting, even though they've ostensibly been championing the PRS sector. And we haven't built enough homes in this country. That's an absolute fact. But we've also had, if I may say so, back to the immigration problem, pretty rampant immigration over the last 10 years. Our population as a country has gone from 62 million to 68 million plus in 10 years, which is nearly 10%. A massive increase in population for the United Kingdom. That's 6 cities the size of Manchester. We can't cope with this.
And to your point, actually, I think you raise an interesting one, because there are companies now that are going out, that are going to towns and cities, they're holding events and saying to landlords, right, come here, we will pay high rents, we'll give you, I think it's about a 5-year term, we'll take care of all maintenance, etc. So they're taking those properties off the market to accommodate these asylum seekers, which is, of course, making that situation worse.
I would I'm not sure how big an influence that is. Now, obviously, migration, when you have net migration like we did last year, that is going to put pressure on rents. But I think saying, so the problem is migration, let's lower it, is probably the wrong response. So there are many benefits to migration, to the economy as a whole. We as a society used to build
No, I'm
houses.
talking about company like Serco. There's loads of them that are taking properties off the market, private rental properties off the market at very good rates. Landlords are just basically going, oh, you know what, great rate there, I'll take it. Maintenance sorted, 5-year deal done. So that is taking
That's the creation of vested interests out of a failed border control.
So I mean, houses are being taken off the private rental sector market for many reasons. I mean, over the past 40 years, lots of people have wanted to move to London, for example, because of changes to the economic system. Now, migration, yes, will cause pressure on housing. There are 2 responses to say, OK, let's stop migration. The other response is to say, let's build more housing. Now, if what we want...
Or do a bit of both.
Well, I think if what we want is a prosperous society, which is dynamic, which has growth sectors which can compete with Europe, America, China, probably the more sensible thing to do is say, let's supercharge house building instead of saying, let's try and keep people out of our country and let's try and keep people out of our big cities so that rent doesn't go up as much.
But then one of the challenges is, of course, you get NIMBYs then. It's all well and good saying, let's supercharge all of these house building, but we've got no mandatory house building targets in this country. That's a mistake, if you ask me. And also, it's very easy to object these days, isn't it? If you don't want something being knocked up at the end of your road. And good luck if you're trying to expand your own property, by the way, because planning, even on that, can be an absolute nightmare. Where do you stand on it all? Today's bonkers story of the day up next. Schoolgirls sexually assaulted, gender-neutral toilets in schools. What is going on?
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant Green, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, Michelle Dewberry with you until 7 o'clock tonight alongside me, former Brexit Party MEP, CEO of First Property Group Ben Habib and the journalist and political commentator Michael Walker. Charles talking about cash, saying, do shops have the legal right to refuse cash? Well, I think obviously they do, because many shops now, you see the pictures on the signs, don't you, on the door saying cashless, which I think is inappropriate. Lewis says, I do not believe in a cashless society, but something has to be done about the black economy. The cash in hand goings on in this country, he says, are rife. John, you're saying absolutely central bank digital currencies would put far too much power in the hands of so-called the elite. Someone else on Twitter saying, Michelle, why didn't you point out that these central bank currencies can be programmed? Yes, you're absolutely right. Honestly, it horrifies me, this whole kind of move towards control. No, thank you very much. Anyway, a school in Essex has had to call in the police after allegations that female pupils were sexually assaulted in its gender-neutral toilets. I've got to ask, why have I even got gender-neutral toilets in schools in the first place, Ben Habib?
Well, I was struggling when I read gender-neutral, as Mike knows. I was struggling with what that meant. I mean, do you have to self-identify as being of neutral gender in order to go into this loo? Or does it mean any gender can go into the loo?
There's a third category, isn't it? If you don't want to go in the boys, you don't want to go in the girls, whatever, go in that one then.
Yeah, so my point is that there are two sexes, there should be two sets of loos, and why build a third set, which just adds to the cost burden apart from anything else of the infrastructure of the school? When I was a child, we had boys and we had girls, and I think that's simple enough. Everyone can go to the loo quite comfortably. No one's going to be put out. We should just go back, use common sense. Boys go to boys' loos and girls go to girls' loos.
I don't think it's a closely guarded secret, but we've got gender-neutral toilets here for space reasons. I absolutely hate it. No offence to you men, I do not want to share a toilet with you.
And nor do I want to share one with you, if you don't mind me saying so.
Good, we're agreed. What do you make to it all?
I mean, I think your preference is perfectly fair enough. I mean, reading this story, I think there is a danger that we insert this into a sort of political fight or a culture war when it comes to trans issues. Because as far as I could tell, this is a school that had men's toilets, had female toilets, and this gender-neutral toilet had been there forever as well. So I think they probably used to call it unisex. It's sort of an open part of the school where you have some cubicles which are not gendered. So I think there is a danger here that sort of every small story that happens in a school somewhere in the country is sort of brought into this big culture war issue. But of course, no, I think there is a place for male and female toilets, and probably most schools should have them. I think it's also fine if a school wants to have gender-neutral toilets.
But why would you have gender? What would motivate you to have a third category when you've got boys and girls? Why would you go for a third category? What are you trying to do there?
Well, so it might be the case, like here, that they wanted toilets in one part of the school and there wasn't space to have them.
Well, then they haven't got boys and girls here.
But here, though, as well, we're adults here. It's a little bit different, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, also, I mean, if we have to make this about
no, but I just want to understand the mindset.
Yeah, well, I mean, we are. So you said when you were young, or when you were in school, there were just boys and girls. Now, you might also have heard people say when they were in school, there was boys like girls and girls like boys. Obviously, society changes, our understanding of people changes. So just as we understood in the sort of last couple of decades that lots of people will be gay, and when that became socially acceptable, lots of people came out as gay, you have a situation now where we have a greater understanding that some people are trans and more people are coming out as trans. And having a gender-neutral toilet in a school is probably a way
But they're two different things, though, aren't they? And people often conflate the two about sexuality and trans issues. So if you're gay, who you choose to associate yourself with in your adult time, I'm conscious that it's tea time, so I'm being careful with my words, but who you choose to associate yourself with is nobody else's business. When you then start talking about, oh, that boy there wants to be a girl, and then you start putting them on this route of hormone therapy, you start what I would call mutilating bodies, binding chests, having physical surgeries, perhaps impacting a child's fertility, impacting their ability in other areas. They are two very, very different things. It's not the same as just saying, oh, that person there is attracted to a boy or a girl, whatever.
I mean, the implications are different. Yeah, I think how we respond as a society to trans people and gay people, it poses different questions. But the reason I think they're very similar is because I think that the roots of them are quite similar. So I think I was born gay. I think trans people were born trans. I think I can recognise myself as gay because society is welcoming to gay people, and I think trans people are now going through a similar thing. I think just to bring us back to this, though, this story, which seems like someone was abused in school, had nothing to do with anyone who was trans. The reason those unisex toilets were there was not because of trans.
Well, I'm absolutely gutted that I'm almost out of time because I've not had a chance to cover that ludicrous story. Have you seen that, the interview with the mum? The struggling mum, when it talks about the bills, and it's not a mum, it's a man in a skirt saying it's a mum, and everyone just seems to think that's absolutely fine. I do. I think that this world is going mad, and that is perhaps a debate for a different day, because I suspect you might disagree with me. But Ben, Michael, that is all we've got time for tonight. Guys, do not go anywhere. Nigel Farage is up next. You know, you won't believe it when you hear his story about what the banks are trying to do with him, trying to get rid of his bank accounts. He's going to tell you all of that information in a couple of seconds, so don't go anywhere.
Hello there, welcome to your GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. I'm Craig Snell. We're looking ahead to the next few days. It's going to remain pretty changeable. Some rain, also some showers, but for northern areas it turns increasingly windy, and it's all down to its area of low pressure. As we go through the next few days, that will edge its way closer towards the UK. But high pressure always close to the south, so here more in the way of dry weather than wet weather compared to the north. So as we end Thursday, for most of us, we end on a fairly clear and dry note, but as we go into Friday, we start to see thicker cloud and outbreaks of rain spread its way into many western districts of the country. But for most, it's going to be a fairly mild night, maybe a little bit fresher than recently, but for many, temperatures staying in double figures. So we start off Friday with some sunshine across many central and eastern parts of the country, but the cloud and rain across the west will spread its way eastwards as we go through the course of the day. May hang on to some brightness for a good chunk of the day for East Anglia and South East England. So where this does occur, it will still feel pretty warm, but elsewhere maybe a little bit cooler than recently. And the most persistent rain really reserved for Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland. Into the evening, very little change. Still the risk of some heavy rain across Northern Ireland and Scotland. Rain a little bit more on and off across England and Wales. And for most of us, it will be a fairly cloudy one. A little bit more humidity building as we go into the nighttime period. So perhaps temperatures overnight a little bit uncomfortable for some in the south, no lower than around 17 degrees. So we start Saturday on a warm note, but the cloud and rain will quickly clear its way eastwards as we go through the course of the day. So a brighter picture for many of us as we move into the afternoon. Quite windy for Scotland, so take note here. Could see some coastal gales and some frequent showers here too. But for many parts of England and Wales, plenty of sunshine. Temperatures around average. Very similar for Sunday and Monday, but watch out for some strong winds across Scotland.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle.